The elevator doors opened on the 14th floor, and Warren Carter stepped out into a reception area that smelled like fresh paint and money. He had been in rooms like this before, not often, but enough to know what they meant. The carpet was the kind that absorbed sound completely, so that even his footsteps disappeared the moment he took them. The receptionist, a young woman with a precise smile and a headset she didn't appear to be using, looked up without quite looking at him. "Mr. Carter," she said, "Mr. Aldridge will see you shortly." Warren nodded and took a seat near the window. 14 floors up, downtown Calgary spread out gray and wide under an overcast March sky. He had driven in from Red Deer that morning, 2 hours on the highway with the heat on low and the radio off. His son, Ben, had still been asleep when Warren left the house. Warren had stood in the doorway of the boy's room for a moment, just a moment, before pulling the door halfway closed and heading downstairs. Ben was 11. He slept like a stone. Warren had laid his jacket across the passenger seat of the truck and driven south with the kind of focus that came not from confidence but from necessity. He needed this to go well. He had not allowed himself to think past that. Now he sat with his hands resting on his knees and watched a crow land on the ledge outside the window, regard him briefly, and fly away. He was 51 years old. He had spent 23 of those years working in structural risk assessment, the last 8 of them as an independent contractor after the firm he'd built with 2 partners quietly came apart over a billing dispute he had refused to escalate. That had cost him clients. The industry in Alberta was not large, and word moved through it like water through limestone, slowly, invisibly, and with lasting effect. He had rebuilt, not to where he was, but to somewhere workable. And then his wife, Renata, had gotten sick, and the rebuilding had paused for 2 years, and then she had died, and the rebuilding had paused again. And then Ben had started having the kind of trouble at school that required Warren to be present in ways he hadn't anticipated, and by the time he looked up from all of it, he was here, sitting in a chair that probably cost more than his truck, waiting to be evaluated. The position was Director of Risk and Compliance at Northfield Capital Partners. It had been posted for 6 weeks. Warren had applied on a Thursday evening, seated at the kitchen table after Ben was in bed, filling out the online form while the dishwasher ran its cycle in the background. He had not expected to hear back. He had heard back within 48 hours. There had been 2 phone screenings and a panel interview over video. He had been straightforward in each of them. He did not perform enthusiasm he didn't have, and he did not soften his answers to make them easier to receive. He answered what was asked and stopped when the answer was complete. Apparently this had been enough to get him here, to the 14th floor, to the chair by the window. A door opened. A man emerged, tall, early 40s, wearing a suit with the particular ease of someone who had worn suits his entire adult life. He extended a hand. "Warren Carter? I'm Stephen Aldridge, Chief Operating Officer. We appreciate you making the trip in." Warren stood and shook his hand. The grip was firm and calibrated. Warren matched it. "Not a difficult drive," Warren said. Aldridge smiled the way people smile when they are already thinking about the next thing. "Come on back." The boardroom was glass on 2 sides, with a long table that seated 12 and currently held 3 people. Warren recognized the names from his research. Patricia Voss, head of legal, Conrad Renner, the CFO, and at the far end, not seated but standing with his back to the room looking out at the city, a man Warren had identified from the company's website as the founder and CEO, Fletcher Howe, 64 years old, born in Lethbridge, had built Northfield from a 2-person advisory shop into a capital management firm with assets in the low billions, was known, according to 3 separate profiles Warren had read, for asking questions that didn't go in the direction you expected. Howe did not turn around when Warren entered. Aldridge made the introductions. Voss and Renner both offered handshakes and the kind of measured attention that suggested they had done this many times. Howe turned only after Warren had taken his seat, and what struck Warren first was not the man's age or his posture but the quality of his attention. It was the attention of someone who was almost always watching and almost never seen. "Mr. Carter," Howe said, and sat down. The interview lasted 40 minutes. It began with the standard sequence: background, experience, approach to risk modeling, familiarity with regulatory frameworks, and Warren answered each question in the same way he had answered them in the preceding rounds, without performances, without padding. Voss asked him about a specific case study involving a mid-sized client facing overlapping compliance exposure. Warren walked through how he would approach it. He used precise language. He did not hedge. Then Aldridge asked him about the gap. Warren had been expecting this. There was a period of 19 months in his employment history, between the dissolution of his former firm and the commencement of his independent contract work, that looked, from the outside, like dormancy. He knew how it appeared. He had decided, before driving down this morning, that he would not explain it partially. Either he would explain it completely or not at all. My wife was diagnosed with a recurrent glioblastoma in April of that year, Warren said. She passed in November. I was her primary caregiver for the duration, and I had a son who was 9 at the time. I made a decision about where my capacity was going to go. I stand by it. The room was quiet. Voss looked at her notepad. Renner looked at the table. Aldridge looked at Warren with the expression of someone recalibrating. Fletcher Howe looked at him without any expression at all. "Thank you," Howe said, in a tone that did not invite elaboration. He made a brief note on the page in front of him. The interview continued. Near the end, Aldridge asked Warren about his longer-term professional goals, which was the question Warren had found most difficult to prepare for, not because he didn't have an answer, but because his answer was not the kind most hiring committees wanted to hear. "I want to do the work correctly," Warren said. "I want to build something that holds. I'm not interested in moving again after this. If it's the right fit, I intend to stay." Aldridge nodded in a way that communicated very little. Voss wrote something down. Renner clicked his pen. Howe studied Warren for a moment, then looked at his notes. "We'll be in touch," Aldridge said. They were not in touch that day. Warren had understood, somewhere around the 35th minute of the interview, that the meeting was not going the way he had hoped. Not because anything had gone wrong, precisely. The answers had been accurate. The questions had been reasonable. But there was a specific quality to how the room had shifted after the question about the gap. A slight withdrawal, a collective recalibration, and Warren knew the feeling well enough not to mistake it for something else. He had been in enough evaluations to read the room without being told what it was saying. He thanked them at the door. He shook each hand in turn. When he reached Howe, the man had already looked away, back toward his notes, or perhaps toward whatever came next on his schedule. Warren walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. He did not replay the conversation in his mind. He had learned over the years that this was an exercise that cost more than it returned. What had happened had happened. He would either hear from them or he wouldn't. He had driven 2 hours down and he would drive 2 hours back, and Ben would probably have left his cereal bowl in the sink again, and Warren would wash it out and start dinner, and the day would become the next day, and that was the shape of it. The elevator descended. In the lobby, he retrieved his jacket from the coat check near the entrance, a detail that had struck him as slightly formal for a mid-morning interview but that he had not remarked upon. He put the jacket on. He buttoned it. He pushed through the glass doors into the March air, which was cold and sharp with the smell of recent rain. His truck was in a parkade half a block east. He had paid for 2 hours. He had used less than one. He walked east along the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets, and thought about nothing in particular. He thought about the crow that had landed on the ledge. He thought about whether Ben's teacher had sent the email she had mentioned last week. He thought about the bag of rice on the kitchen counter that he had forgotten to put away before leaving this morning. He was almost to the parkade entrance when he heard his name. He stopped. The voice had come from behind him, and it was not the voice of anyone he knew. He turned. Fletcher Howe was standing on the sidewalk 15 meters back. No jacket, no assistant. Having come through the lobby doors at what appeared to have been something close to a run, he was breathing slightly harder than the distance warranted. The cold air was already putting color in his face. Warren waited. Howe walked toward him, and as he did, he seemed to be making some kind of internal adjustment, slowing his pace, settling his shoulders, arriving at something that was not quite composure, but was close to it. "I'd like 5 minutes," Howe said when he reached him. All right, Howe looked back toward the building, not as if he expected someone to follow him out, but as if he were establishing the distance. Then he looked at Warren. "The gap," Howe said. "I had the same question as Stephen did. I don't have the same concern." Warren didn't say anything. "I spent 14 months running a company while my wife was in treatment," Howe said. "Not a large company at the time, but it was what I had. I ran it badly. I was distracted in ways I did not fully understand until afterward. I made 2 decisions in that period that cost us significant client relationships. I've spent 20 years wondering what would have happened if I had simply stopped." He paused. "You stopped. That's not a gap. That's a decision." The cold air moved between them. Down the block, a delivery truck was reversing slowly, its backup tone a steady rhythm against the ambient noise of the street. Warren said, I appreciate you saying that. I'm not saying it for your benefit, Howe said, without any particular edge to the words. I'm saying it because it's relevant to a conversation I want to have with you. Warren studied him. Howe had the quality, Warren had noticed it during the interview, of someone who had learned to say exactly what he meant and no more. It was a quality Warren recognized because he had worked over many years to develop something similar in himself. It was harder than it looked. Most people talked around things. Howe didn't appear to. The Mercer file, Howe said. Warren's attention sharpened, though nothing in his face changed. The Mercer file was not public. It was a compliance review that Warren had conducted 4 years ago for a mid-tier investment firm in Edmonton, a review that had turned up a structural irregularity in how certain assets were being categorized. Warren had flagged it. The firm's leadership had asked him to reframe his findings. He had declined and submitted the original report. The engagement had ended immediately. 3 months later, the firm had been subject to a regulatory review that resulted in a significant penalty. Warren's name appeared in none of the public documentation. The file had been confidential. He had never discussed it with anyone outside the formal proceedings. I don't know how you know about that, Warren said. I don't imagine you do, Howe said. We share legal counsel with the regulatory body that handled the review. Nothing improper about how I came to know, but I know. He let that sit for a moment. You walked away from a significant contract because they asked you to write a report that wasn't true. You didn't file a complaint. You didn't publicize it. You just left and submitted the accurate report and let the process work. Warren said nothing. I've been looking for a director of risk who would do that, Howe said. Not the dramatic version, the quiet version. It's harder to find than you'd think. The delivery truck had completed its reversal, and the backup tone stopped. The street was quiet again. The panel had concerns about the gap, Howe continued. Stephen especially. He'll come around or he won't. That's a separate matter. He looked at Warren with the same calibrated attention Warren had observed in the boardroom. I wanted to ask you something directly, without the room. Go ahead. If you take this role, and 6 months from now you find something in our portfolio that you don't like, something that isn't illegal necessarily, but that doesn't sit right with you, what do you do? Warren thought about it, not for long, but genuinely. I bring it to you, Warren said, in writing, clearly worded. And I give you a reasonable amount of time to respond. If the response isn't satisfactory, I document that as well, and then I make a decision about whether I can continue in the role. What if it affects a major client relationship? The size of the relationship doesn't change the answer. It might affect the timeline. It doesn't change the answer. Howe nodded once, slowly. It was the nod of someone who had been the same question in different forms for a long time and had learned to recognize certain shapes of answer. One more thing, Howe said. Warren waited. Your son. How old? 11. The position has significant demands. Travel isn't constant, but it's not nothing. How are you thinking about that? It was not the kind of question a search committee would ask. Warren understood that the formal process had certain guardrails, and this conversation was outside of them. He also understood that Howe was not asking out of intrusion, but out of the same directness that seemed to govern everything the man said. It was a real question because it was a real consideration. He has a good routine, Warren said. My sister lives 40 minutes out and is reliable. I've managed demanding work before. I'm not looking for an arrangement that's light. I'm looking for one that's honest about what it is fair, Howe said. They stood on the sidewalk a moment longer. A woman in a red coat passed between them without acknowledging either of them, talking quietly into her phone. Come back upstairs, Howe said. It wasn't a request, exactly. It wasn't a command either. It was more like the conclusion of a calculation, stated plainly, with the assumption that the other person had been running the same numbers and had arrived at the same result. Warren looked at the parkade entrance. He looked back at Howe. Give me a moment, Warren said. He took out his phone and sent a message to his sister Joanna, asking if she could pick Ben up from school. The reply came back in under a minute. A thumbs up and a string of characters Warren was reasonably certain constituted a joke he didn't fully understand. He put the phone away. All right, he said. They walked back toward the building together. Howe did not make small talk. Warren did not try to fill the silence. The glass doors opened automatically and they crossed the lobby to the elevator, and Warren pressed the button for the 14th floor. And this time when the elevator began to rise, the feeling in his chest was different from when it had descended. Not relief. It was too early for relief. Not hope, exactly, because hope had a particular fragility he had learned to be careful with. Something steadier than either of those. The meeting that followed lasted another hour and a half. Patricia Voss asked him 3 additional questions about regulatory procedure. Conrad Renner walked through the compensation structure with the precision of someone who expected to be understood on the first pass. And Warren understood him on the first pass, and this appeared to satisfy Renner in a way that he expressed through a very slight relaxation of his shoulders. Aldridge asked nothing further about the gap. Howe said very little but was present in the way that founders sometimes are. Not dominating a room but organizing it, the way a load-bearing wall organizes a structure without calling attention to itself. At the end of the meeting, Voss said they would have an offer ready within the week. She said it in the tone of someone stating a fact rather than making a promise. Warren thanked them. He shook each hand in turn. When he reached Howe, the man met his eyes and held them for a moment. "The Mercer situation," Howe said quietly. "That kind of thing tends to cost people more than it cost you. You should know that we know that." Warren nodded. He took the elevator down alone. In the lobby, he walked out through the glass doors into the March air, which was still cold but had shifted slightly. The kind of shift that happens in late winter, barely perceptible, when the angle of the light changes by a degree or two and the season begins very quietly to prepare to become something else. He walked east to the parkade and found his truck on the second level, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. Through the concrete railing, he could see a narrow strip of the street below, the flow of people and cars moving in their various directions. Ben would be in math right now. He was not good at math, and he knew it, and he was working on it with a patience that Warren found, privately, more impressive than any particular talent would have been. Warren started the truck and pulled out of the space and followed the ramps down to the street level. The attendant at the exit took his ticket and made change without looking up. Warren drove west and then north toward the highway, and the city gradually gave way to the outlying grid of warehouse rooftops and bare trees and the long, flat expanse of prairie opening up ahead. The offer came on Thursday. Warren read it at the kitchen table, in the same chair where he had filled out the application forms 6 weeks earlier. It was a fair offer. Not extravagant, but structured in a way that reflected an accurate understanding of what the role required and what a person who could fill it correctly was worth. He read it twice, then set it on the table and went to make tea. Ben came down the stairs in his socks, pulling his hair into something approximate with both hands. "What's that?" Ben said, nodding at the papers. "A job offer." Ben considered this with the particular economy of 11-year-olds. "Is it good?" "It seems to be," Warren said. "Are you going to take it?" Warren poured the water into the mug. He thought about the 14th floor and the crow on the ledge and the sidewalk outside the parkade, and Fletcher Howe standing in the cold without his jacket, as though the distance he had crossed had not occurred to him until he was already crossing it. "Yes," Warren said. "I think I am." Ben opened the refrigerator and began a detailed inspection of its contents that Warren recognized as preliminary to asking whether they had orange juice. "We're out of orange juice," Warren said. "I know," Ben said. "I'm just checking." He put the orange juice on the list he kept on his phone, a list that now had a new item at the top, and he finished making his tea, and the morning continued in the direction that mornings do.